Well, good evening, friends, and welcome back. Cumberland Outdoorsman here with another Glenfield Model 60 that belongs to a friend of mine, and he's been having problems with the gun functioning, okay? He said what it's doing is when you fire around, sometimes it wants to stovepipe. In other words, it's not ejecting the one that's been fired, and it's trying to load another shell into it, so it's kind of like double feeding almost. I think I can pretty well correct the problem. So if you've got a Model 60 Marlin or Glenfield and it's causing you problems loading and feeding and ejecting, you might want to follow along with me in this video, because we're going to find the solution to the problem and I'm going to show you how to fix it. First of all, let's see if this gun will actually malfunction on camera here. I've got some shells loaded into the magazine here. We'll go ahead and load it. That one there went in no problem. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and fire a few shots and see if it does it. First shot, it did it. There you can see it. That shell is not ejecting. That's the empty shell right there. This is a different problem from what I presented in an earlier video that I did a few years ago, where the rifle was actually damaging the cartridges as it was trying to feed them. It was ejecting the empty, but as it was trying to load the next shell, it was actually jamming up. So let me see if I can get this one. Okay, that one came out. Let's see if it does it again. There it is. See, it's just not wanting to eject the empty like it should. That gun's jammed up again. It's got one empty right here jammed against another one trying to go in the chamber. So let's get this gun inside and take it apart and see if we can find the problem. And then once we fix the problem, we'll take it back out here and test fire it again. So follow along with me. Well, folks, here I am at my workbench with this Glenfield Marlin Model 60, and just to give you a little bit of background, I went ahead and took this gun apart and found the problem and repaired it. But since I've got better lighting today, I thought I'd reshoot this video and show you exactly what I did to alleviate the problem. So first of all, we want to make sure the gun is not loaded, which it's not. It's totally empty. And we're going to go ahead and remove the magazine tube. And I'm going to remove the scope as well. Make sure we get the right screwdriver bit here. You don't really have to take the scope off, but it just makes it much easier to work on the action of this gun with the scope out of the way. So we'll go ahead and remove the scope. Now, when you take these screws out, make sure you use the right screwdriver blade. Don't use just any screwdriver. Make sure that it's the right one to match up your gun, because you're just going to mar the slot of the screw up if you don't. And here we've got two basic screws and then the one in the middle. The one in the middle, we're going to leave it in place. Okay, there's no sense in taking off this trigger housing right now, because we're not worried about that. Take out the main action screw here, lay it aside. and then the one at the very bottom. And I'll lay it right next to the one that I just took out. Now you can remove the barreled action. We'll go ahead and set the stock aside here, get it out of the way, and I'll show you how to take this entire assembly right here off and apart. That way I can show you what I did to alleviate the problem. What it was doing was stovepiping, as you saw in the first part of the video. The shell, as it was feeding a new cartridge into the chamber, all that has to be unobstructed. The shell that was in there, the empty shell that is, was not ejecting. Okay, it was not being removed from the action so that there was room for the new cartridge to go in. And there was a reason for that. And I'll show you the reason here. I'm going to go ahead and pan down here and show you exactly what I'm doing. I'm not going to make this real long or tedious, but you might want to follow along with me here in case you own one of these rifles and you've got a problem with yours. We'll get zoomed in here. First of all, like I said, you need a good screwdriver set. Here I've got multiple bits in this set, and make sure you have the right screwdriver for your gun, your particular application. And then I've got a pair of needle nose pliers like these here, a scribe like this one here, and then just a piece of wire. And this piece of wire is very important. I'll show you what you need that for. Okay, we know the gun's unloaded, of course. We'll go ahead and take out the two screws here and this barrel bolt in the rear. Now on newer Marlin guns, these were made out of plastic. This here just kind of hinged in here, and then you had plastic pins on the rear here. But on these older Marlins, all this is made out of steel screws, which in my opinion is better quality. You want to put everything in order, in the order that you took it apart. I've got this white towel down on my workbench, that way I can keep up with all the little intricate parts, like these tiny screws and E-clips and everything else that I'll be taking off. Okay, by taking those screws out, you can lift this entire action assembly right out of the receiver here. And I'm going to go ahead and remove this bolt because I want to demonstrate something to you. Take your charging handle out. It just lifts right out. Here's your bolt with the return spring and the spring guide pin. Okay, it's a pin that goes inside the spring here that guides it along as the action is working back and forth during firing. And while we have this off, I'm going to clean that out again. Make sure everything is squeaky clean before we put it back together. Alright folks, here I've got this action assembly at my workbench, and I'm going to show you the repairs that I made to get this thing working again. And I'll give you a close-up on exactly how it's supposed to work and how the parts inside this action assembly actually work together to make the gun run smoothly. A few of the problems that I ran into, first of all, was this bent return spring here. You can see how it's bent in the middle. I'll go ahead and zoom in on that a little bit so you can see it more clearly. You can get these springs online, So I replaced it with a new spring here, and I went ahead and put the guide pin in the spring so I wouldn't lose it. Secondly, I had a problem here with the cartridge lifter. That's what this part right here is. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so you can see that better. As I push up and down on this part of the cartridge lifter, you can see this going up and down. What that does is, as the next cartridge is in line to be loaded, this arm comes up and moves the cartridge into position so that when the bolt slides forward, it loads it into the chamber. Okay? One of the issues I had is that the edge of this cartridge lifter was rubbing against the feed throat. This is the feed throat right here, this shiny piece. It's a big metal block that fits between these two plates right here. If that's rubbing against one side or the other, you're going to have loading issues. Trust me. That needs to be uninhibited travel right there, going up and down freely, just like it should. Thirdly, this spring right here, this is the cartridge lifter spring or return spring. The piece right here that acts as the ejector, as the bolt slides rearward and the edge of the cartridge engages with the front of this spring, that's what kicks the empty shell out. Okay, this was bent down so badly it was actually down inside the feed throat. I don't know how the gun was working, but obviously we had some serious loading issues. So I bent it back into shape so that it'll work the way it should. Now the other end of this spring here actually loops under the cartridge lifter so that it applies upward pressure on that for it to work positively the way it should. If that spring is rubbing or touching anywhere or it's bent out of shape, you're going to have loading issues there as well. And I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate how this little action works. Here I've got a 22 cartridge. I'm going to go ahead and load it into the action here. There's no barrel here, so there's no danger of it going off, but anyway, I'm just going to show you and demonstrate how this is supposed to work from the factory. Here I've got a spent cartridge case, and we'll go ahead and clip it into the front of the bolt face here. Now, upon firing, as that cartridge goes off, the explosion drives this bolt rearwards, okay? And as it travels rearwards, you'll see this cartridge case flip out of the action as I move further rearwards. You see how it did that? That's because that little end of that spring right there hit the rim of that cartridge and kicked it out. Now, as the bolt continues traveling rearward from the force of that explosion, it rebounds against the recoil buffer, which is back here, and then travels forward again with the force of this return spring, and it picks up the next cartridge in line right there. It's starting to pick it up. And then it pushes it into the chamber, ready for the next shot. And then, of course, if you want to eject that shell, you just move the bolt rearward and it kicks it out. That's the way that little action's supposed to work. I don't know if that's ever been done on YouTube before, but I just thought I'd demonstrate that right here to show those of you that have one of these guns how that's supposed to operate. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go into a little bit more detail on how to take this action assembly apart so that you can effectively clean it and make any repairs that you need to make and do it the right way so that you won't run into any problems. Alright folks, I got a light shining down on this workbench here so that you can see all the parts that I'm taking out of this action assembly, and so that you can follow along and do this the right way, okay? Because there is a right way and a wrong way. I know I've gone into this before, and I keep going back to the Model 60 Marlin or Glenfield. And the reason I do that is because there's just so many of them out there that need work, you know, and there's so many of them that are sitting around. I can tell from the comments that I've gotten from previous videos that there's a lot of you folks out there that need help with this action. So, as requested, I'm going to try and cast better light on the whole situation here. Okay, the first thing we need to do before we take this plate off of here is make sure you have it in the right position before you take it apart so that you can look at everything. And we need to relieve some spring tension here. There's two springs that we're concerned with here. The cartridge lifter return spring and this hammer spring right here. I'm going to zoom in on this, and you really need to follow along. This is very important right here, folks, so really pay attention to what I'm doing here so that you'll know how to do this the right way. Okay, first of all, we need to get the tension off of this hammer spring. And if you look very closely at what I have here, there's a strut that runs from the hammer through the spring, through this little bridge right here between the two halves, these two plates. And Marlin has very conveniently supplied us with a hole right here at the end of this strut. I think you can see that. I got the end of the scribe sticking through that strut right now. And there's an easy way to get the tension off of that spring so that, you know, when you take the plates off of it, things don't go flying across the room. That's where this little wire right here comes in very handy. You take your wire and just feed it right through the hole in that strut, just like that. Okay? And right above the end of that strut, there's a little foot right here, or a projection that's sticking out. What that does, that's actually the hammer release sear. That's the end of it. When you squeeze the trigger, it pushes forward on this little foot right here and releases the hammer. The hammer comes up, strikes the back of the bolt and the firing pin, and the gun goes off. So what you want to do is put a little bit of downward tension with your finger and hold the action assembly pretty firmly here. Put forward tension on this little foot right here, just like that, and ease up on that hammer. Make sure that it doesn't pop up and hit you into your finger. Just keep good steady pressure on it. I'll do it again here just to be sure you see what I'm doing. Put downward pressure on it and then forward pressure on this little foot, and then you can ease it up just like that. Okay, don't let it fly forward. Make sure you keep pressure on this because there's a lot of tension on this spring right here. Okay, folks, had to take a little break, but anyway, now that we have the tension relieved off of this hammer spring, it's time to get the tension off of this cartridge carrier spring. I'll go ahead and flip it around here so that you can get a closer view, a better view of it here. We'll go ahead and move this part of the spring off of the top of the feed throat. And if it's not bent too badly, you should be able to do that. And then at the bottom, right down here, the other end of this spring actually loops under the cartridge carrier. You just want to grab a hold of it right there and just pull it away. Just like that. Now then, all the tension is off of this spring as well, as you can see. I'm going to zoom out again to show you this part. Now this is also very important. Remember, you do this the way I'm showing you here. You want the recoil buffer on the left side and the feed throat on the right side. That's the way you want it facing you, with the hammer in the upward position away from you. Okay, just like this. Now you can go ahead and safely remove this plate and expose all of the internal workings of this action assembly. And I'll just use my scribe here. I put a little bit of tension against the E-clip. Remember, keep a little tension against it because these are also made out of spring steel, and if you don't hold down on them, they can flip off of there and go across the room and you won't be able to find them. Go ahead and lay them down. Some actions have more, some have one back here, but basically speaking, you've got these two pins right here. Okay? Now you can very carefully and slowly remove this plate and lay it down. Now we've exposed all of the internal workings of this action assembly. This is the cartridge carrier or cartridge lifter. That's the way it should look. This is the cartridge lifter spring. That's the way it should look from the factory. Okay, this thing was bent so badly downwards that it could not engage the rear of the cartridge. So you just want a slight bend, and like I showed you, there should be a small gap between the end of this and the top of the feed throat. Well, now you can take this feed throat off, and you can either replace it if you need to, but in most cases you just need to clean it real well, and you can clean it up with a bristle brush. This one here is in pretty good shape still, so we'll put it back in place. And these came in different configurations through the years. You know, there's different ways that these were made depending on the action that you have and the year of manufacture. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and put it back together. I didn't want to make this a real long video. Remember, if you've got it with the feed throat on the right side and your recoil buffer on the left. And by the way, folks, this is a good time to replace this recoil buffer if you need to. It just mounts on this little pin right here with the bottom hole. And that's basically it right there, you know. So that's the way it goes on. And then this spring goes on with the long end facing towards the right. Just like that. Okay, let me do that again. You want the long end of it facing downwards and forward. And that's the way it goes on. Now, this cartridge lifter, you want this little dog leg part of it facing downwards, and it goes right in to the middle of your feed throat, and it sits on this top pin right here. There's a bottom pin and then the top pin. The top pin is what mounts the hammer, and then the bottom pin is for the sear and the disconnector. Okay? You can go ahead and put this cartridge lifter into the feed throat and just put it on the pin just like that. Remember, put it on the top pin. Now you can go ahead and put it back together. Once you have everything cleaned and reassembled, I didn't want to go in too much detail here because I try to keep this as short as I can. And when you put all this together, make sure you get it all aligned. Don't force anything. You know, it should all go together. You may have to maneuver some of this a little bit to get the holes to line up with the pins. Just like that. Okay? I just had to wiggle it around a little bit to get everything to go back together. You'll know it's right once these pins are projecting through this top plate. Now I'll go ahead and put my clips back on here. That's where I use these needle nose pliers. I just put them on one end of the pin and the other end on the E-clip itself. Now that's back together. Now in order to put the spring back into position, remember it has to go under this cartridge lifter, because right now there's no tension on it. It's just flopping back and forth. Get your needle nose pliers and grab the end of it here, right where it's bent, and push it down under there, and that'll lift it back up. Now, move this spring back into position on top of the feed throat. That's the way it should look, just like that. Now you can go ahead and move the hammer back into the cock position. Push all the way down till you hear it click, and you can remove this wire here, get it out of the hole, and now it's ready to be put back into the main part of the receiver, and the gun can be reassembled. Okay, here I've got the barreled receiver. I'm just going to go ahead and clean this out. Just wipe it down good. That's all you need to do. Just like that. Get any dirt or any debris or anything out of it. And I'm just going to give it a light squirt of lubricant here. We'll go ahead and wipe the bolt down. You can clean the bolt face while you've got it apart here, if you need to. This one here is in pretty good shape. That should slide freely just like that. Now, to get this spring back in here, it can be a little bit tricky. The spring guide here goes into the spring, and it's got a little place right here at the back of the receiver that cradles it, kind of holds it in place there. You want to put the open end of the spring into the hole of this bolt right here, okay? Just like that. Now, very carefully align the end of the spring guide pin with that hole there, and carefully compress the spring. You don't want to kink it here. You want to just compress it very gently. And then just feed the bolt back into the receiver, just like that. Now is the time to put this charging handle back in place here. And I'll just move the bolt rearward somewhat. Now it's back in position, right where it should be. Okay? Now it's just a matter of getting the action assembly here back into place. You'll feel a slight bit of tension here as that goes back together. Go ahead and get your barrel bolt back in position. We'll feed it through there so that it's back where it needs to be. Go ahead and tighten this down slightly. You don't want to tighten it all the way yet. Just kind of screw it down. Now, you want to move the front part of the receiver assembly even with the bolt holes here. Remember, don't tighten anything down until you get all the screws in place. That way you won't cross thread anything. And once you get all the screws in place, you can go ahead and cinch them down. Like that. You don't want to over tighten anything. Just get them back snug down good. That's the way it should operate. That sounds like music to me, folks. You can see how that bolt's traveling freely, just like it should. Now, before I put this barreled action back into the stock, I've got a rag here that's impregnated with some mineral oil. I want to wipe it down real good. You don't want to leave your handprints all over the bottom of the barrel and the magazine tube here, because with time that will rust. Okay, make sure you get that wiped down real good. And what this does, it leaves a real fine coating, a real fine film of mineral oil on that metal, and that'll help preserve it, keep it in good condition. That's how you keep these old guns running, folks. You got to take care of them, you know. So we'll go ahead and get the action back in the stock, get the screws put in, and then we'll take it out and test it, make sure that it's working like it should. Well, folks, I got this little Model 60 Glenfield put back together, and now it's time to put it to the test to make sure that it's functioning properly. So I loaded 3 different types of CCI ammunition. I've got some CCI Mini Mag, 22 long rifle hollow point. I've got some standard velocity that we're going to start out with, and then I've got some CCI Blazer, and we're going to be shooting them interchangeably to make sure that the gun's functioning properly. So, okay, here we go. That's the standard velocity. That's the Mini Mag high velocity hollow point. And next we got the CCI Blazer. All right. That's 5 shots each. Looks like the gun's working flawlessly. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the scope back on here and get it sighted in. Well, folks, I went ahead and reinstalled this scope and got it roughly sighted in at 25 yards. And to be quite honest with you, this little rifle could stand to have a better scope mounted on it. I think this is what came with the gun when it was sold. It says here, All Pro by Kmart. I would say it was marketed with the gun. And it says here, made in Japan, right there on the scope. But honestly, looking through it, it's pretty dim, and the optics aren't very good at all. And the gun would shoot much better with a good scope mounted on top of it. But like I said, I've got it roughly sighted in at 25 yards, and here I've got the target. Here are some shots using CCI Blazer. It's shooting a little bit low and to the left. I just wanted to see what kind of grouping I could get. And then I used the CCI Mini Mag, and I got 2 shots. This is a 5-shot group. One here right at the bottom of the bullseye, and then one next to it, and then the last 3 shots grouped into one ragged hole right there. So the gun has potential, but it just needs a better piece of optic equipment mounted on it. And I hope that whoever ends up with this little rifle would go out and get them a good scope and put it on this gun. That way it can realize its true potential. So with that being said, thanks again for coming along. I do appreciate it. Hopefully you gained some useful information from this video. And I'm glad I got this gun operating the way it should. And I wanted to, share that with you. I know I've got more videos on the Marlin Glenfield Model 60, and I'll leave some links in the description below, so if you want to see those videos, just click on the link and it'll take you right to it. So with that being said, remember, if you like to go hunting, fishing, camping, shooting, hiking, no matter what your outdoor pursuit happens to be, I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. But also remember this: hit that like button, smash the bell icon, and subscribe. That way you'll know when more videos like this one will be coming your way. So until next time, y'all take good care of yourselves. Get out there and enjoy the great outdoors. And if you go out and shoot your .22, have a lot of fun. Just make sure you do it safely. This is a Cumberland Outdoorsman wishing you the best, and I'll see you next time.